Hello, it's Deborah from the attic, and today I have the latest Tonic craft kit. This is kit number 15. As you can see, it's packed with things. So I'm going to take you through each of the items and then we're going to make some cards. There's a whole range of cardstock in this kit that matches all of the other elements that have been included. And I don't want to dazzle you with this, but this is a sort of a pink mirror card. And the rest of the cards are a mixture of pearlised and textured. This is particularly lovely. This is sort of textured flowers, and there's a very deep embossed and textured heart patterned rose coloured paper. You can see how deep the embossing is if I lift it out. This is I always love these sort of, they're like spun silk textures, very, very beautiful. And there are 3 plainer cards, so this is the cream and the brown and then a craft card. The next thing I want to show you are the ring binders that come with the kit, and they're in 2 different shades. One is a sort of a goldy vintage colour and the other is a coppery bronzy colour. I hope you can see the difference in the 2 colours there. One of the things I have disliked in the past about using ring binders is a difficulty sometimes in opening the ring, but these ones present no problem at all. They open really easily and that's a joy. And you get so many in the kit. I was quite surprised when I opened the kit and I saw just how many there were. There are 6 rings in each bag, so you have 12 rings altogether, which offer you loads of options for making lots and lots of books. There is glitter in this kit. This is chestnut brown, pure sheen glitter, and I hope you can perhaps see, if I put it closer to the lamp, perhaps you can see just how sparkly and rich that just looks like melted chocolate. You just want to eat it, which I'm sure you shouldn't do. I'm sure that's not good for you. And there are chestnut brown flakes, and I hope you can see the difference with these. So these are little thin, tiny little pieces of shimmery, flaky, chestnutty loveliness, and they would be great for inclusions in shaker cards, for example. There are some lovely inclusions in this kit as well, which we'll have a look at. One of the first things that I want to show you is the Nouveau gilding flakes that are in the kit. Now, I've used a 2-way glue in the past on gilding flakes if I haven't had the right sort of glue or whatever. So this is a 2-way glue. It's by Zig, and I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on my card, and I'm going to give that a moment or two to go from blue to clear. If I applied these immediately, the glue would still be a little bit too wet, so I'm going to wait for that to dry off. And while we're waiting for that, I'm going to show you the Bubblegum Blush Nouveau drops. I love these little mini bottles, they're so sweet. And if you're familiar with these drops, you will know that you get a lovely 3D domed effect, and that they will sort of self-level. They don't level out flat, but they don't leave a little tip on the top. They level out smoothly, but you still get a nice rounded shape. There's an acorn brown hybrid ink pad, and usefully it has it on the side, so if you store your ink pads facing you, you don't need to write on the side as I usually do. It's on there already. And this colour is really lovely, and you can see how it matches with all of the papers. Everything is chosen very carefully to match. There is a Nouveau glitter marker. This one is called Strawberry Bonbon. I have had a little play with this already. I've taken it out and primed it. The way that you prime it is by pressing the nib very gently up and down a few times, and that will draw the ink down into the nib or into the brush of the pen. And that's just gorgeous. That's just liquid glitter. So easy to apply. Just really pretty. That glue is now ready to take the gilding flakes. When you open these, whatever you do, don't sneeze. In fact, don't breathe. They're so light and delicate, and I'm sure we've all had them all over our desks in the past if you breathe just too heavily. And the last thing that's included with the kit is a full size of expanding mousse. These are the dies from the set. you can see there are some quite large ones, and these are going to be ideal for making a book cover. And then there are some smaller ones. There's some sentiments as well. There's a couple of sentiments here, and then there's lots of options for corners. And then there are two smaller frames as well. The stamp set has some lovely sentiments, and so our adventure begins, and this says time to treasure, and they have some little twirly bits around the edge of the of this rather nice font, and it made me think of Edwardian or turn of the century styles of lettering. So I think that might give me a clue for how I might use some of the papers as we go ahead and use the kit. We're going to create a very simple cover, and this is to show you how to apply the little die that cuts out the holes. All it does is cut out the holes. I've used some of the card in the kit, and this is just a very straightforward way of cutting out the shapes, and then I've cut my textured brown card in half, and I've also cut a little strip of the beautifully textured heart paper, and I'm just going to show different ways that you could layer these up and you could use them to make your own book covers. I'm going to use the glitter pen to cover a piece of white card, and then once I've covered the card completely, I'm going to run it through my die cutter. I'm going to use one of the very fine dies to cut out a sentiment which I'm going to add to my book. These dies are very, very fine, and as you can see, that glimmer pen gives it a really nice pink shimmer which works very well with the rest of the colours that are on the front of this book cover. I'm using my little Nouveau drops to add some tiny little dots of interest, although I will add more at a later point in making this book. I've used one of the pieces of craft card to create the back of my little book, and I've also cut out some plain copier paper to fit in between, and I'll attach the little rings to complete the book. Very simple, very straightforward, just using the items in the kit. I want to add a little bit of extra interest to my book, so I'm using the ink pad and one of the tiny little stamps, and I've got a hole punch here which is about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm using that to just punch out a little sentiment. Again, I've stamped this onto some card which has had the glitter pen applied to it. Now I want to add a border to that little circle, so I'm using my ink pad just to mark up a piece of card with brown ink, and I'm going to use my hole punch again just to pop that out. And obviously these two holes are the same size, so I'm just going to trim a tiny little bit of my pink round sentiment, and when I apply that to the brown background it gives it a nice little border, so I can stick that into position on my book. I've reserved some of the other papers that I cut down to make this book, and we'll be using those to make a slight variation to the original book in another project. For project 2, I'm making a card photo frame. So it could be a card, it could be a photo frame. I've got a brown border around the outside which I've gutted so I can keep the centre of that for another project. I've used some of the beautiful gold card, and I'm adding the corner pieces that I've cut from the pearlized brown card, but I'm only adding glue to the extreme outside edge of those little corners, and I'll show you why when we get to that point. This is a photograph that I happen to have, and I thought this would be a nice way to display it. If you don't have a photograph, there are these Tim Holtz family portraits available that you could buy, and you could use these if you wanted to add a family portrait to your frame. All I'm doing is tucking the corners under the very elaborate little cutout corners, and that will hold my picture in place. For project 3, I'm going to make another book cover, but it occurred to me that I might be able to run this through my die cutter using a piece of card from the box that the kit actually came in. And I thought if I run it through, maybe then that will give me enough indication of where I could cut out. Once I'd run it through my die cutter, I found that actually I could pop the whole piece out and I didn't need to use my scissors at all. So this will give a much stronger front and back to any book that you might want to make. I'm using the top half of the textured brown card that I used in the first book that we made, and all I'm doing here is just showing you how to use up those pieces of paper. You don't want to waste them, you don't want to lose them, you want to get the maximum use out of them, and this is just another way to make sure that you can do that. I've got some double-sided adhesive paper and I've cut a strip from it just wide enough to cover the area of my book between the top of the pink paper and the bottom of the brown paper. I'm sticking this down with my fingers, and when I peel off the protective paper I'm going to bring in my glitter. I'm going to sprinkle my glitter all over this because this will add a lovely twinkle to my book cover. I'm going to burnish this with my finger just to make sure that the glitter is all sealed down and nothing is going to come loose. And now I'm going to glue my decorated front cover onto the corrugated cardboard cover that we cut from the kit box itself. I'm going to show you a way to cut out the holes again, because if you're doing thick material you might not want to run this through your die cutter. First of all, I'm going to add my sentiment, so I've used my die cutter to cut out the word that says reminisce. It's a bit shiny, so it's very difficult to show you because I've cut it from that lovely rose gold Miri card. I've also got a piece of ribbon, and I'm going to use those notches in the ends just to tie a little bit of ribbon around the front cover. Now this is how you can use your little hole sizer again. I've put it in place and I've used my pencil to run a little mark through there so I know where to punch the holes, and I've used a crocodile to punch out the holes, and this is a particularly good way to make sure you still get your holes in the right place. They'll match up with everything else, but you don't have to run it through your die cutting machine. Now I'm going to make a nice simple straightforward card. I've got some of the brown textured paper and I'm going to glue this onto a white top folding card. Actually it's going to be a side folding card by the time we finish with it, and I've used one of the smaller dies, the one with the corner cutouts, to cut a piece of the ivory card that has the texture of roses and leaves on it. I've also die cut 4 of the corners, these are the rounded corners, and I've glued them into position. I've die cut the sentiment Remember When from the same Miri card that I used to cut the corners, and I'm going to glue that into position in the centre of my side folding card, and that's it, the card is complete. I've taken a piece of plain white cardstock and I've folded it in half, and I'm using one of the smaller rectangular die cuts to cut through both layers. If you leave this little gap at the top here and you don't put the die on the card at that point, then you'll be able to cut out the rest of the card and the top will stay intact and it will become a top folding card. I've used the die with the corners cut away to cut out this piece of ivory textured card, and I've backed it with the plain brown card from the kit. I've used gold heat embossing on one of the stamps to make it stand out on this piece of cream card, which has also been backed with the plain brown card. And these little strips that I'm playing with and positioning are from previous makes. Now I'm taking a photograph of a young couple from a Tim Holtz photo booth set, and that matches perfectly with the sentiment that says, "And so our adventure begins." And I'm going to glue everything into position, and once I've done that, my card will be complete. And I do love those little photo corner details. Our final project isn't a finished piece, but I wanted to show you how the expanding mousse works. So I've got a piece of plain brown card from the kit, and I've got a stencil by Tim Holtz, and I'm going to press the expanding mousse through the stencil using a spatula. I'm protecting my mat underneath with a piece of plain white paper. The white paper will also help me heat the mousse, and I'll show you that in a moment. Once everything is covered, I'm going to quickly take my stencil away and I'm going to drop it into water so that that mousse doesn't stick to it and make it more difficult to clean off. It's always a good idea to wash your stencils immediately after use. When I peel this back, you'll see just how beautiful the copper colour on its own is before we do anything else. I've heated up my heat gun really quite hot, and I'm going to apply the heat to the mousse, and as I do so the mousse changes in colour, so it goes darker. This is the golden part at the end that hasn't been heated yet, and these parts have been heated and they've changed. They look almost metallic, and it doesn't go puffy, it stays quite solid, so you could then add waxes to that if you wanted to really show the texture. Thank you very much for watching, thank you for your time. I'm going to leave you with some close-ups of all the projects that we've made today, and until we meet again, take care.